All right. So, like I said, this is our year in review to go over some of the content we covered this year. So, we have a couple slides from each, and we're just going to touch upon the main points of that. Did you register in Frontline by chance, Hope?
Um, I hit the link that was in the email. I'm not sure if I actually registered.
Okay. Well, we do have Act 48 that we are offering. So if you would just do the registration in Frontline, then you'll get credit for your attendance, and our secretary will do that.
Okay.
And then we will take attendance at the completion of the meeting. So make sure you stay for the entirety of it. We will have this recorded and on our YouTube channel and the Padlet for later viewing. And then we will have some survey questions at the end, which will enter you for a prize, which we will actually probably do tomorrow because, well, it's the end of the year. So a couple of our objectives: highlight the main points and concept of each monthly professional development, and then review the Behavior Coach Padlet just to review some resources and some things that are available to staff. So our first professional development from this year was the behavior basics. We talked all about those very basics of behavior. So some things that maybe we're familiar with, maybe this is a refresher, but we talk about the ABCs of behavior and being the antecedent. So what occurs immediately before the behavior of concern, the behavior, so an observable and measurable act of an individual, and the consequence, which would be any event that follows a behavior and then influences the future rate of behavior. And when we talk about consequence, it doesn't always have to be something that is undesired. Consequences can be good too, just like if a student does something they're told and we give them a high five or a fist bump, they are reinforced by that. We show this picture of the bad behavior iceberg. So you can see at that very top of the iceberg, there's a lot of behaviors that we can see, like shouting or biting or crying, swearing, refusal. Any of those kinds of things are behaviors we can see. The things that we don't see are some of those underlying factors, just like an iceberg, the major part of it underneath. So maybe that distress or anxiety, some problems at home, maybe school is hard, maybe they're tired, maybe they're ashamed, they have some discomfort, they're sad. There are so many different things underneath that could be causing some of those behaviors within our students. And our whole goal is to really determine what the function of behavior is. So behavior is a form of communication. They're either trying to get something or to avoid or delay something. So behavior will sometimes occur because they're trying to get the attention from staff or peers, maybe something to eat or drink, help with a task, maybe access to an object or activity or a desired location, or maybe for some students, it is sensory stimulation. On the other hand, some students may want to avoid or delay. Maybe it's a task or activity that's too hard. Maybe it is just something that they don't enjoy doing. Maybe they're trying to avoid pain or discomfort or some peer interactions, some loud or irritating noises, a chaotic environment, or those social interactions altogether.
Our second PD involved data collection, which sometimes can be daunting. But our goal for this PD was really to just break it down into manageable ways for our staff members that we support to really just get that data collection to determine if our interventions or something that we implement within our classroom is working and making positive gains towards our goals, or just shaping that behavior that might be disruptive. So we identified why we collected data. We identified patterns in behavior. Tracking that data allowed the teachers to identify patterns and trends. Maybe, it's always at 10 o'clock in the morning. Let's take a look at why this might be happening at 10 o'clock. Maybe a student is hangry, is right before lunch. Maybe it's always during transition. So really, we identified those patterns and behavior so then we can determine what kind of interventions we might put into place. We also like to measure our progress. Behavioral data can be used to measure student progress and determine if the effectiveness of the intervention is effective that we put in place. Are we making positive gains, or is the intervention not very effective? If it's not very effective, that's okay, but we're not going to continue to do it. We maybe just go back to the drawing board, and that's again a-okay. It also improves instruction. Understanding student behavior can help teachers adjust instructional approaches to meet individual needs. We also discussed, excuse me, three different types of data collection. We talked about frequency data. Maybe it is a calling out behavior like you see in the slide that we have here, and it's just simply making an X during morning meeting, math, reading, and just breaking the student's day down into different time slots. We also talked about ABC data collection. It's just a different way to talk about those ABCs and investigate the antecedent, the behavior and consequence that Amanda talked about a little bit earlier in our presentation. So in this example, the student is given a verbal instruction to begin an activity. The behavior would be out of seat behavior, and the consequence is the student is provided with a verbal reprimand to sit down. The last type of data collection we talked about would be data collection. We talked about out of seat behavior, and you could see that we broke it down into different activities, and then the start time and the end time, the duration, and then any notes that may be just determining the function of the behavior and just really looking at how often the student is involved in that disruptive behavior.
As far as this slide, so our data collection, it helps determine, so we choose the behavior of concern. We would collect data for several days just to get a baseline, and that baseline is really important for us to determine if we are making progress or not. It does help determine the potential function, so to gain something or to avoid something. We would choose an intervention to increase a desired behavior. So if you take a look on the right-hand side there, it has those function-based interventions, and it has escape maintained behaviors and attention behaviors. So those are just some different types of interventions that can be put in place based upon that why of the behavior, so based upon that function. Then there's some tangibles over there as well. At the very bottom, you can see there is a little chart that we have in here. So we have, maybe we'll say this is, let's say, out of seat behavior, and there was some baseline data taken over the course of 3 days, and we can see they were out of their seats, let's say 7 times on the first day, 6 times on the second day, and then 7 times on the third day. The intervention that they chose for this one was praise. So what we're doing is we're praising the student for maybe remaining in their seat, for doing something in seat that they're supposed to be doing. As you can see, that behavior was tracked after the implementation of the intervention was put in place, and we can see the decrease of the number of times that out of seat behavior is occurring. This is really good for the students to be able to see their progress, but also for us to give us the motivation to keep on going. So we could say, well, the behavior is still occurring. Well, it certainly is, but we've seen a significant decrease in the number of times the student is out of their seat. So we can say that our intervention is effective. We do recommend collecting data for about 2 weeks after you implement an intervention. That just gives the student enough time to really understand what the intervention is and to make those changes. If we're changing our expectation, sometimes we might see a little bit of an increase in behavior before it kind of comes back down.
Professional development number 3 involved procedures and routines. We always like to quote our buddy Fred Rogers here. In the quote that we chose to include in this slide presentation for all his children feel far more comfortable and secure when things happen predictably, with routines, rituals, and traditions. Those traditions, big or small, create anchors of stability, especially in rough seas. So really, we just wanted to break down why the procedures and routines are important and how it can benefit students as well as our classroom settings. It helps get rid of distractions. It raises the likelihood students can focus on learning. It saves a whole lot of time. Students know what are expected, and with each routine, they know the process in each step. It lessens the workload. There's no guesswork, and especially important for our students who may have, our nervous Nellies or students that have some anxiety, and it decreases frustration as well. Our next,
So,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Amanda.
no, you're good. Do you want to continue, Jake?
I was gonna say I'll talk about the left, you talk about the right. So the left part
Okay.
of this, our thought for this presentation was just pick out like the main ideas and some of our takeaways from our Padlet, which we'll discuss at the end. But on the left side here, it's just we broke down one of the resources that we've included in the Padlet, and it was just breaking down our day into how many procedures and routines our students really are experiencing throughout the day. We have into the classroom, how we get out of the classroom, transition, walking to another area of the school, using the restroom, how we're going to line up at the water fountain, what we're going to do at the water fountain, how long is your drink going to be? What are you going to do once you're done with your drink? How you sharpen your pencil? Maybe you have, a little bin to prevent the noise going on all day within your classroom setting, or maybe you just have, you do have a process. All of these things and so many more, just you really sit down and think like, holy cow, we do have to sit down and teach these students what our expectations are, just so we take away that guesswork and it helps our classroom be a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, absolutely. And with our students, they come into our classrooms and we are ready to go for the teaching. So we have all of our academics, we're ready to go. And if you see that first triangle, it is that upside down triangle. And you can see like your typically developing student, your typical child that would come in would have that cognition as like the very biggest part. Like that's at the forefront. They're ready to go. They're fed, they're dressed, they have all those basic needs met for them. And then it kind of like whittles down to the very bottom where survival is really not something they're thinking so much about. If you think about the kids that are coming into our classrooms, and maybe you're seeing them too, but we've seen, students coming in with a lot of trauma in their past or in their background. And, maybe their parents are separated or there's a family member in jail or there's some drug or alcohol abuse. Any of those kinds of things are considered to be traumatic events for our students. And when those things happen, that really affects the way in which they're able to come to school and learn like your typically developing student. So while the other typically developing student is focused on their academics, that student who's experienced trauma is really more focused on their survival. Those basic needs, are they met? Are they cared for? Are they loved? Do they have enough food? Those kinds of things. So as we see that happening with our students, that cognition part of it, they're not really ready to learn in that situation. So we talk so much about the importance of relationships and building those relationships with our students so they can feel that safety within our environments. And then our fourth professional development was reinforcement. We talked a lot about reinforcement with students. And like we said a little bit ago, consequences can be reinforcing to students. So we have to think about what will be reinforcing, and what we can do in order to figure that out is we could ask the student if they're old enough, if they are verbal, they can tell us what are some things that they like. We could communicate with a parent or guardian, provide some choices, do observations, and maybe a preference assessment for our student. So just to help determine what are some things they like or don't like. And not every student likes the same thing or will always be reinforced by the same thing. I mean, listen, I like a Kit Kat bar, but if you give me a Kit Kat bar every time I do something, I'm probably going to get tired of Kit Kat bars and my pants are not going to fit anymore. So um, not a win-win. So the positive reinforcement, when we're talking about positive and negative reinforcement, we are talking about adding something. So we're going to be in mathematician mode right now. So positive reinforcement, we add something pleasant or desired to a situation. Maybe that's a toy, maybe it is a snack, maybe it is attention, but either way, we're adding something in order to get the appropriate response from the child again. On the other hand, we have negative reinforcement. So we're taking away something unpleasant or undesired. And I'm going to pause for 1 second. When we had our administration meeting, some of them were questioning a couple of the things we had on here. This is an example of negative reinforcement. If this is something that is not permitted within your building or with your administration, certainly that's fine. This is just an example of what negative reinforcement would be. So taking away something unpleasant or undesired. So let's say you have Johnny and Johnny doesn't typically do his work, but maybe today, Johnny is really working so hard and he has 20 problems to do. And I'm going to say, Johnny, you are doing such a great job working on all those problems. You know what? I want you to cross off 5 of them. We're taking away an undesired task because he's doing a good job. In the same way, maybe Johnny is in the cafeteria and he has an assigned seat, or our class has an assigned seat because of misbehavior, or they're not meeting our expectations in there. Maybe after a couple of weeks of having assigned seats, maybe they sit like boy, girl, and they never want to sit next to the girls, and the girls don't want to sit next to the boys. We're going to say, you know what? You guys have done a really nice job. You have been remaining in your seat. You are throwing away all of your trash. You're being responsible. We're now going to remove that restriction. You're free to choose your own seat. And this really just goes through quickly. I'm not going to read all of this for you, but the positive reinforcement, again, we're adding something. So you can see it's broken down into 3 categories. That social reinforcement, the tangible reinforcement, and then the activity reinforcement. And then at the very bottom, we have that negative reinforcement to remove something in order to hopefully get the desired behavior in the future.
Our next professional development talked about responding to disruptive behavior. Being prepared and being proactive is our best practice that we talked a lot about within that professional development. Um, Reduces annoyance and frustration. Correction procedures are only effective if they reduce the future occurrence of the behavior. We have to make sure that our procedure or intervention matches the function. And this is sort of, I talked to Amanda as we were presenting to the administrators. I feel like professional development 5 really sort of like started bringing everything together. You know, we talked about the procedures and we talked about interventions and we talked about all these things. And this is sort of like the aha moment where everything sort of just started really tying together. We talked about all behavior serving as a purpose. It's a communication. It's a maybe they have a basic need that Amanda talked about earlier. You know, there's a negative peer interaction. Establish consequences that fit the nature of the problem. You know, if we have little Susie and we think that sometimes we have teachers that have a recess that maybe that Susie's missing recess as the punishment or the consequence. And if taking away that recess period isn't working for Susie, it's not matching the function of the behavior. I mean, we're not going to keep doing it. We're eventually going to kind of hit that brick wall, and we need to stop and think and maybe reflect on how we were responding to that disruptive behavior and picking or selecting a more appropriate consequence. We talked about implementing consequences calmly and consistently, and that's really being a model for the students and what we would like them to maybe how they would we want them to react to disruptive behavior, maybe just even negative peer interactions. And then ideally consequences should be implemented immediately in the setting in which the infraction occurs. We also talked about how procedures, we talked about how procedures for academics, we're going to assume the student has been taught or learned the wrong way. We're going to diagnose the problem and then provide interventions. Maybe we're going to reteach, or we're going to pull them in small groups. We're going to practice, practice, practice. We're going to review it. And then we're going to really just determine if they have learned the new skill. We're going to follow the exact same procedures for behavior. We're not going to assume that students know. It goes back to the procedures and routines. And we're also like, we're not going to just assume that, taking something away or providing a punishment or a negative consequence, they're going to really learn their lesson. And they're not going to do that any longer. We can't assume that student behavior will change. And we talked about this continuum here on the right. And we broke down all of these things, starting with planned ignoring and going all the way to the end of formal conferencing and just really talking about that continuum of strategies of how we're going to respond to behavior errors.
For student engagement, we defined active student engagement, and what it does is improves comprehension with our students, increases their retention of the content because they are interested in what that is, helps develop the critical thinking skills, enhances motivation, and promotes deeper understanding. Some best practices for that would be removing any factors that would negatively impact the attention. So if we're thinking about positioning of a student or placement within the classroom, being next to a vent could be particularly distracting for a student, or near the door or near the fan or a certain peer. So things like that to help prepare the environment to remove those distractions. Teaching the behavioral expectations. Certainly, expectations can make things fun, you guys, because everybody knows what to expect. I mean, if you go into a training and we tell you what to expect, and we're saying, okay, this is what we're doing for the day. You have a little schedule of events, you know where the restrooms are, where the best place to go to eat is whenever you come to the IU. So it just allows everyone to kind of be on the same page, to have a sense of relief and knowing, okay, like I know what we're doing. I'm prepared for the day. It's the same with our students. Other best practices, building rapport with our students and relationships through that classroom environment, incorporating the interests of the students, especially those students who might be struggling to engage. So incorporating something if they are really liking, baseball or superheroes, incorporating some of those interests to hopefully get engagement from those students. Embrace learning and failure. Sometimes things are going to work for us and sometimes they're not. The other option is having some choice for our students and giving them those options. Again, without reading through all of these different things on here, we have some different opportunities to respond. So, for example, if we ask a question and we look for a quietly raised hand, we're engaging one student at that time. But if we are providing opportunities for the students to respond as a group, we're getting everybody actively engaged within that lesson. So there are ways to do that with individual opportunities through the use of whiteboards, those yes or no, true, false, maybe cards, signaling with like your thumbs up, thumbs down to get everybody involved. There could be some group opportunities to respond in thinking about maybe those choral responses where students would answer in unison, incorporating a think, pair, share, or a turn and talk, using maybe a graphic organizer, reading with a partner, and then some high-tech opportunities. So if you have access to technology within your classrooms, there are so many really cool high-tech opportunities to respond that can be used. And we go through all of this through that professional development, and we give an opportunity at the end of that to try out some of these things as well. So there's just some really cool things in there.
The next professional development we talked about was the power of choice. Why in the world are we giving choice to students? Sometimes we give the students the illusion of choice. It's teacher driven. You might you have these students that we talk again in the professional development about how we have so many choices. I drove to school today. I drove in silence because it was just quite the morning with getting all the kids ready for school, and I chose what khaki pants to wear, and I decided to go to the cafeteria as far as lunch went. So we have so many choices as adults, and it's really just a powerful way for our students to feel like they have that say, and they have that autonomy and ownership within their learning process. It would increase engagement. We know the more a student is involved and engaged in a lesson, more times than not, the disruptive behaviors decrease, and it also improves academic outcomes. This also is super important in thinking about the students who are defiant, who often get into power struggles, wanting to be in that control. It really just gives them, again, that power and that ownership over their learning. We then broke down our day within that professional development into honestly just how much choice we can provide students with. We started with, a morning. How are we going to start our morning? Are we going to have a soft start? Are we going to give them choices? Do you want to do worksheet A or worksheet B? We talked about break time choices, giving them that choice of, you going to play with Legos during a break? Are you going to go to the sensory room? Are you going to jump on the trampoline? How about what you do whenever you're finished with all of your work? We're not just going to sit there and, disrupt our peers or roll on the floor. We have these appropriate, maybe you're reading for 20 minutes, or um, writing a friendly letter to your teacher from last year. So again, just giving students choices, but going back to those procedures and routines, that especially with that, like, I'm done. What are you going to do when we're done? This is what we're going to do. Here's your choices. You can cross them off as you go, or whatever that might be. What types of choices, as far as group works, choose what I'm working on. Maybe instead of doing activity A, B, C, the students decide to do CBA or BAC, whatever that might be. Look for them. Choose where I'm working. Maybe I'm working on the beanbag chairs. Maybe I'm working safely under my desk. Maybe I'm using the flexible seating. Choose when I take breaks. Am I going to, finish writing 5 spelling words within sentences and then take a 1-minute break and then continue with that process? Maybe I'm just going to hash out everything really crunch down and finish all those sentences and then take my break. You can read through all of those. I don't want, I don't want to go on a rant right now, but the choices, but the flexible seating choices, as well as just places to do work, really just providing the students with as many choices as we can.
And then our last one, we talked about resolving conflict like mature adults, right? So rock, paper, scissors. I don't know what could not be resolved through that. Just kidding, you guys. Okay. So we talked about making relationship building a priority. I mean, we never, I would think I wouldn't go into a situation with a stranger and tell them all of my problems, all the things that are going wrong if I'm having a rough morning. But when we have those strong relationships and those strong connections with the people around us or with the students we're working with, it makes them more likely to be willing to open up, to share with us, to have those trusting relationships and work through some conflict that they may be experiencing, maybe at home, maybe at school. Some other ways we can really help with this is through morning meetings, really having those emotional check-ins. I know we've talked about the first 5 in the past, so we're on our we're still on the first 5 kick. It's a great one. If you need that access, let us know. We can get that for you, but it is free online. Providing opportunities for social skill practice, especially if we're observing some behaviors occurring frequently or we're noticing patterns of behavior, taking that time to provide practice for the students with those specific social skills is really a great use of time, and role playing through real life situations or those needs that are seen within the classroom. I think Jake was saying a little while ago about, the importance of practicing some of that and giving them those opportunities to practice, is really important. And then that can actually help when the problems arise, so they're prepared already because they've practiced whenever they are regulated. There's a couple different resources on here. How do I respond to conflict? So this is just like a little handout that we have and really just doing a little bit of a reflection on ourselves and how we are responding to conflict and are there areas in which we would hope to improve. If we're thinking about the brain, we have kind of like that like a green part of the brain. That's like your upstairs brain. We call that, like, that houses all of our executive functioning skills. That's like our ready to learn. It has all of those problem solving, critical thinking skills that are in there. We have that yellow zone that you can see. And then that inside part, really, we always say, like, if you flip your lid, you are no longer using that green thinking brain, but you are using that little amygdala inside. That's our fight, flight, or freeze response in there. And when that is activated, we are not in that thinking brain. So we have to come back to our baseline, our regulation, in order to be able to really have conversation and process some things that have happened. Our last little wheel on there is just like a what can I do wheel. It's a visual. So again, when we're not in that thinking brain, we are not able to process information. Sometimes visuals are really helpful in order to choose a strategy of what am I going to do when I feel frustrated. Certainly teaching this in advance when a student is regulated is really important so that they're able to choose that whenever they are not. And I think that's it, Jake.
It is.
That's all we've got with 1 minute to spare. We will not go over the Padlet with you, but we will. Oh, thank you, Jake.
You're welcome.
But we do encourage you, take a look on there. All of our professional developments are posted in there for you. And it goes through, I mean, there's lots of different information in resources linked under each section for you. But like I said, all of these are being offered to our schools next year. It's for free, and it is they'll be from 30 minutes to an hour that we can provide professional development in person. And we also have some time we'll be spending afterwards just for some collaboration or consultation.